Loading hot takes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back into TwinTakes Fantasy Football. Today we'll be breaking down the Week 2 slate of games and getting you primed with all the fantasy knowledge relevant for you to win your second week of the 2022 NFL season. Today the schedule is going to look a little bit different, just tweaking it to make sure I optimize the content and find a format that works best for both the viewer and myself. So instead of matchups to exploit, I'm going to go into some matchups that I really want to highlight, analyze the games in its totality, both sides of the balls, and pick out the players that I want from both sides of the ball to play in this matchup. After I do my few highlights, I'll go into the best of the rest and some quick hits on other matchups that I don't think deserve a really deep dive, but at least a noteworthy mention of one or two spot players. Finally, we're going to wrap it up with our game of the week, just like we did in the week 1 preview. After that, I will give out my guys, those guys that I'm going out on a limb on that I think should probably be started despite maybe consensus saying that they should be on the bench over in favor of some other guys. The test that I like to use for my guys that I've decided on is Diontae Test, just because last year he had this stretch of games, I think it was like 7 or 8 games in a row where he scored 11 or 12 points, and consensus would say that's a fantasy starter, but I want to try to find guys that are a little bit deeper that are going to give you a little bit more upside than just 11 or 12 fantasy points. So these are guys that are going to pass the Diontae test, and then I'll just wrap up with my parting thoughts for the week and arm you with the best possible information before you head into this week's fantasy football extravaganza. So with that being said, let's dive into our first matchup. It's going to be Commanders at the Lions. This has an over-under of 49, almost hits that 50-point threshold that we like to see as fantasy football players on the over-under. Detroit is projected to win this by 2.5 points, which leaves Washington with a projected point total of 22.5 and Detroit with a projected point total of 26.5. I do think that this game is going to hit over 50 points, so that's why I'm including a game that the over-under is currently at 49. That's just because these are two above-average offenses going up against two bottom 10 defenses, and you may be saying, hey, whoa, this is Jared Goff and Carson Wentz we're talking about. How are these above-average offenses? Well, I think there's a lot of things that talk about both Washington and Detroit as really excellent offenses, and I can't, in kind of an antiquated viewpoint, people overestimate a quarterback's value and how they weight the effectiveness of an offense. And I think based on things that we're seeing in the college game and things we're seeing in the NFL game, that perception is starting to change a little bit. In the NFL, we're seeing how valuable that dynamic running backs are that have pass catching ability and can really extend plays from the RPO perspective. We're seeing how much the value of wide receivers has gone up just from either a draft capital perspective or just a total contract value, creating this different viewpoint of an offense instead of relying on just the quarterback to carry an offense and make the weapons around him better. It's actually being focused on as more of this offense as equal pieces scattered throughout. And also Eric Galko, the director of the Shrine Bowl, one of the many bowls coming out of college football, he has a great article about why we're seeing so many quarterbacks emerge in their senior season, like a Kenny Pickett, like a Joe Burrow, just because of how the game is developing around making sure that there aren't as many stresses on the quarterback position, and we're utilizing the skill sets of the other players in the offense to amplify the offense, not put that responsibility solely on the quarterback. So after getting off of that soapbox, we're looking at two teams who have really incredible skill position players, and Detroit and Washington both had 4 relevant assets apiece in their offenses for fantasy last year. For Detroit, we're talking about DJ Chark, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamal Williams, and DeAndre Swift. On the Washington side of the ball, it's going to be Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, and Antonio Gibson. So this is a game that I'm really banking on some of the depth pieces. Jamal Williams is one of those dudes that if you are sitting in Cam Akers or J.K. Dobbins' hell right now, I would pick him up and I would start him. That's just because even though DeAndre Swift had an amazing game, the Lions had 5 red zone touches for running back. Do you want to know how many of those 5 that Jamal Williams got? That's right. He got all 5 touches. Not a single red zone touch from the running back position went to DeAndre Swift. That's not any slander on DeAndre Swift. He was amazing in his own right, still scored 25 points. I'm just saying how valuable Jamal Williams is in this offense and that they're going to continue to utilize him as such. And on the Washington side, obviously McLaurin and Gibson are smash players. However, I will favor Curtis Samuel over Jahan Dotson for a couple reasons here. Dotson had an amazing first game for a debut game as a rookie. However, he converted 3 catches into 2 touchdowns, and that's just not production that is sustainable or something that's going to be consistent. And Curtis Samuel is just absolutely involved in this offense. Like his target share was top 5 around his percentage of the offense equal to Justin Jefferson. He had 22 total opportunities, 11 from the running back position and 11 from the pass catching standpoint. So, which is just an absolutely absurd target share of the offense. So that's why I think Curtis Samuel is actually going to be a smash start. Hint, hint, wink, wink this week. So if I had to rank all the players, obviously Swift is going to be number 1. Amon-Ra St. Brown is definitely a player you got to play number 2. Gibson, McLaurin, Jamal Williams comes in my number 5th ranked player in this matchup. Curtis Samuel after that. And then we finish off with Dotson and Chark as some of the more deeper players that I may stay away if I have better options on my roster. Overall, I'm taking Detroit to win and cover, and I believe this will hit the over. The second matchup I want to hype will be Vikings versus Philadelphia. Philadelphia is currently favored to win this game by 2.5 points. This one does hit that magical 50-point over-under threshold, sitting at a current over-under at 51 points, leaving Minnesota with a projected 23.5 points and Philadelphia projected to score 27.5 points. These are 2 top 5 offenses and ranked in offensive efficiency based on PFF metrics. These aren't terrible defenses by all standards, but when you have these 2 offensive juggernauts going up against each other, I don't even know if the best defense in the league could slow them down. It was absolutely insane what we saw each team put up respectively last week. I mean, Jalen Hurts, talking from the Eagles' perspective, this is a dude that scored 24 fantasy points without even throwing a touchdown. That's just unreal production that we've never seen before. He has now elevated himself, into my eyes, after just 1 week, into that Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson type tier where you start him no matter what the matchup is. Maybe last year, he was a top 5 quarterback last year, and maybe you sat him against some harder matchups. No. Jalen Hurts is the guy. Set it, forget it, never worry about it again. He is that good of a fantasy quarterback. And A.J. Brown, he's everything they build him as and more. He already looks ingrained in that offense. He already looks super comfortable, putting up over 20 fantasy points without even a touchdown. What this man is going to do this year is absurd. For anyone who had him falling in the draft due to the shift in scenery, I pity you. He is going to be absolutely amazing this year. I will say the Eagles' backfield can be a little confusing. Sanders had 15 total opportunities, Gainwell had 9 total opportunities, and Scott only had 4 total opportunities, but each one of them was relevant last week because they each got a touchdown. The Nick Sirianni Fantasy Football Committee back is in full force. He loves his committee, and he won't go anywhere without it, so I could see why there might be some hesitancy to play some of these running backs, but right now, I'm locking in Sanders for the flex spot and avoiding the other backs in this committee. Sirianni has come out and publicly stated he's going with a hot hand, and the fact that Sanders had by far the most opportunities in this offense and was the one to score the first touchdown and ran the most reps in the first half means he's the guy that I think Sirianni will trust with the hot hand and has the most fantasy upside. On the other hand, Vikings, they look absolutely revamped under Kevin O'Connell. This was everything they had promised with the hiring. Obviously, last week was a little bit of a letdown for Thielen and Dalvin Cook owners. However, that's just because the game got out of hand so quickly. Green Bay was just a shell of themselves. I expected this game to be a lot more competitive. I expected bounce backs for both Thielen and Dalvin Cook, and this is going to have a much different tone in primetime under the lights for these stars. There's a ton of guys in this offense that you just have to play. Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Dalvin Cook are all absolute smash stars. I'm playing them for certain. Goddard is, if he's your tight end and you don't have a guy above him, I'm very comfortable playing Goddard. Sanders and Thielen are the other 2 pieces that I do feel comfortable playing in this matchup currently. I am not playing Irv Smith, Devontae Smith, or any of the other committee backs in Scott or Gainwell, and that's frankly a lot of how I like to approach Monday night games and just the strategy around fantasy football. I'm going to circle back into this because this is going to tie into my parting thought on the week, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But some of those guys that have a lot of question marks around them in the offense, they could go off, but I'm not taking shots at depth pieces on Monday night. My call for this game, I think it's a trap game for the Eagles, and I think the Vikings win this outright. So they cover and they win. The third and final matchup that I want to highlight is Cardinals versus Raiders, another game that's hitting that magical over-under of 50 points, currently sitting at an over-under of 51.5. Las Vegas holds a -6 line right now, so Las Vegas' projected point total is 28, while Arizona is projected at 23.5. I do think this line is just slightly misleading. The Chiefs, I think, were underrated coming into this game, so when they put that beating on the Cardinals, they made them look far worse than they actually were. Plus, the Cardinals had sustained so many injuries on the defensive side, with Rondale Moore being out. DeAndre Hopkins is suspended. So even bringing back Rondale Moore into that offense is going to open it up a lot more and I think make things a lot easier for Kyler. So expect the opposite of what we've historically seen with the Cardinals. And I think that as they get some of these players incorporated back in the offense and come healthier and to full strength, they'll look a little bit better and put up a little bit more competitive games than what we saw in week 1. But that over-under of 51.5 is just too juicy not to take advantage of. And we just need to talk about that touchdown Kyler threw to Hollywood. That was incredible. That's the kind of touchdown that doesn't happen overnight to just a guy that would just randomly put on an offense. That's the touchdown of guys who are, on the same mind meld with each other. And I expect as this offense progresses and they become more familiar with each other, that even though it was kind of a disappointing game for Hollywood Brown owners, again, he didn't get that touchdown until garbage time. Just the fact of how he ran back and ran in to intercept that ball and knew where Kyler was going with it shows me so much promise for Hollywood. If someone in your league is down on him, definitely trade for Hollywood. I expect him to be amazing in the rest of the year. And also, the target share from Ertz is exactly what we expected to see. Kyle's going to continue to pepper him with targets, so he's definitely in line for another tight end 1 year. Continue to roster him without any wavering in your convictions. Going on the other side of the ball for the Raiders, I'm going to go against the grain. I thought the Raiders looked excellent last week, despite people saying, I can't believe they dropped that game to the Chargers. Carr looked horrible. Listen, the Chargers were my preseason favorite for the Super Bowl, so let's take it down a step. If I had to compare two games that are supposed to be of juggernaut offenses, I personally think the Chargers versus the Raiders was much more competitive and closer. Obviously, it's closer, but if I had to compare Chargers, Raiders, and Rams, Bills, I would say even in the loss, the Raiders looked better than the Rams currently. And that's just because even on both sides of the ball, obviously Carr had his kind of Carr-esque moments, but Waller looked good. He looked healthy. He looked confident. No issues around that hamstring or any injuries that he had sustained. Davante Adams is just Davante Adams. That dude is a beast and one of the best 2 receivers in the league, along with Justin Jefferson. And on the defensive side, they came up with some pretty crucial stops. They looked good against one of the most dynamic offenses that the Chargers have. Hobbs and Moehrig did really well in one of the best receiving cores in the league with the Chargers have, and Jones and Crosby really held up a very strong defensive line. I think give it a few weeks, people are going to have a lot higher opinion of the Raiders here. So expect a bounce back game here from Renfrow and Waller. Again, I'm going to rank a lot of the pieces here, and then of course there's just some no-brainer pieces. Davante Adams, Hollywood Brown, James Conner, and Darren Waller are all guys that need to be in your lineup. Definitely putting Josh Jacobs as an RB2 this week. I will also play Zach Ertz and Hunter Renfrow. The only guy that really is missing here is Rondale Moore, but I'm just going to hold off just because of the injury. You don't know how well he's going to be incorporated back in the offense right away. I'm going to say that Cards will cover that -6 line, but the Raiders get the win. So those are the 3 games I really wanted to highlight. Going into the quick hits, Jets, Browns. I'm only playing Hunt and Chubb. There's nothing in that Browns offense passing attack that made me even remotely excited for what Jacoby Brissett has to offer. I'd honestly probably drop Amari Cooper at this point. Maybe you hold him in hopes that Deshaun's a little bit better when he gets back, but I'm not playing any passing options. I'm only playing Hunt, Chubb, and with the Browns defense, I'm shying away from any Jets players and even with Michael Carter's big game last week, I'm not playing them if at all possible. Bears, Packers. This is going to be a different tone than last week. It's going to be in Lambeau. Expect revenge game from Rodgers. I will be playing only Dillon and Jones. I'm going to avoid the pass catchers for right now. Even you look at, Rodgers' confidence has been severely shaken in those pass catchers, and it's from Christian Watson's drop and some mental mistakes from rookie Romeo Doubs. So I'm going to stay away from the pass catchers until one really emerges in the Green Bay offense. Dillon Jones should be absolute smashes for this week. Nola, Tampa Bay. This is not going to be Kamara's bounce back game. I know people are eager for him to come back, but this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive line is ranked number 1 currently after week 1 by PFF. So don't expect a high upside from Kamara on the ground. Fournette did limp off after the Cowboys game, so I'm not sure what's going on with his injury status and his health. We saw the rookie Rachaad White come in and play a few snaps after he limped off, and I don't think the weight situation is making it any better for Leonard Fournette. So I only really love the number 1 wide receivers in each respective offense in Evans and Thomas, and I'm going to move on because, those NFC South conference games tend to get really dirty, grimy, and just you can never tell with those games. They're so weird. Colts, Jags, it doesn't excite me at all. Pittman and Taylor obviously smash starts, and on the Jags side, there's nothing that really convinced me that this Jags team is ready to take that next step. Trevor Lawrence still showed some stuff in the first game against the Commanders that I really want him to work on. Etienne had a couple of dropped passes, a couple egregious rookie mistakes. So he's more of a flex in my mind this week, but I'm looking for better options elsewhere. Falcons, Rams, Kupp, Henderson, end of list. Move on. No Falcons. I love Drake London, but not. Ramsey's going to eat up the rookie. Next. Titans, Bills. I have a feeling that this is going to be a blowout. I'm really kind of down on the Titans this year. I'm not trying to reach on any depth pieces. Again, it's another Monday night game, so just in the way I strategize about fantasy football, I try to stay away from any volatile pieces on Monday night, and I'll go over this a little bit more in my parting thoughts. So no Knox, no McKenzie, no Burks, no players that have any sort of question marks around them, and we'll circle back around to this at the parting thoughts. So finally, the big bad matchup of the week is...
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Another Thursday night game, Chargers at Chiefs, with the highest over-under we've seen in the NFL right now at 54.5 points. Chiefs are favored by 4 points, leaving them with a whopping estimated point total of 29.5, and Chargers just have a measly 25 expected point total. How can you not love another game with two of the top 5 teams in the NFL in totality? Offense, defense, quarterback, wide receivers, everything across the board. They're just top 5. This is exciting. I love these meaningful games early in the season, and this is why we all were excited about the arms race that was the AFC West. So far, Mahomes has came out and silenced every critic doubting him in the offseason. Obviously, I was one who contended that it wasn't Tyreek that made Mahomes, and I pointed to a lot of the volatility numbers of pre-Mahomes, post-Mahomes, but not post-Malone, post-Mahomes. But I think that even some people pointed this out. Losing Tyreek might be good for this offense. It's going to force Patrick Mahomes not to just wait on Tyreek to be his bailout and chuck it up and try to make these quote-unquote street ball plays. I hate when people talk about Patrick Mahomes like that. He is by far the best quarterback in the league, and you should not slander that man. But it's actually going to force him to work through his routes, work through his progressions, and make very smart plays. And we saw how well he distributed the ball to a lot of his wide receivers and Travis Kelce and all the running backs. We're looking to see that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to have this third year resurgence. He looked amazing in week 1, and that's where I thought, again, we can say it in chorus now. Vacated targets go to the running back. And that's what we saw. 2 receiving touchdowns for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Yeah, that's what we've been talking about all season here at TwinTakes. And Isaiah Pacheco, that guy looks like a man among boys running the ball. Wow, he is that dude. He has the most exciting 7-yard runs I have seen in the NFL recently since maybe Derrick Henry of 2 years ago. I'm not in on him just yet, just because those runs came in the fourth quarter after the game was well out of hand, and they obviously relied on Clyde Edwards-Helaire to do most of the RB1 workload. But dude, I'm excited for his future. That dude looks good. I don't know if I see a single wide receiver emerging as a true number 1 in this offense, but obviously take your shot on some of the guys. If you need an upside, if you're kind of falling behind in a week, these are the guys to play. Hopefully you get a really bomb touchdown to MVS or McCole Hardman, and that could potentially win you a week there. So on the other side, the Chargers offense is amazing in its own right, even without Keenan Allen. Again, we talked about how I thought the Raiders were a little bit underrated, how good the play of Moehrig and Hobbs was in the secondary, and obviously their defensive line. They're going to be faced with more competition. I think at the end of the day, I know it might be sacrilege to say, but I think the Raiders defense might be a little bit better than the Chiefs defense. But we'll have to see how that plays out. So the Chargers could even feast more than they did in the first game against the Raiders. Obviously, even with losing Keenan Allen, the Chargers offense is just a comedy of offensive weapons. They just have so many guys that they can utilize. It's insane. Gerald Everett, Joshua Palmer, Jalen Guyton, Joshua Kelly was super involved. Austin Eckler obviously is the heart and soul of that offense. So yeah, not worried. They're going to put up the same offensive efficiency without even sustaining a hiccup. And listen, Mike Williams without Keenan Allen, don't let that two-point game and half PPR worry you. He's going to bounce back. I'm scared. I face him in both leagues, in both my main leagues this week, and I am terrified of what he's going to do to me. So let's get in. Like the highlights, we're going to rank our players. Obviously, there's going to be some guys from this matchup that, you you just got to play regardless. So that's going to be Travis Kelce, no brainer. Mike Williams, again, bounce back game. I believe in the talent. He's going to be there. Austin Eckler, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Juju is the wide receiver that I am going to bank on in this game just because he had the most targets out of any wide receiver with 8. And also just the experience of being a more veteran NFL player. I'll also take deeper shots on Josh Palmer, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Gerald Everett. Why Marquez Valdes-Scantling over Mecole Hardman? Well, honestly, there's nothing much more to say other than the fact that Mecole Hardman got the touchdown last week, and now I'm banking that the touchdown goes to someone else this week until we see one of these wide receivers really establish them as the alpha in this offense, which I don't think will happen based on my preseason prediction. But it's going to just be hot potato. So whichever wide receiver didn't get the touchdown last week is probably going to be odds-on favorite for the touchdown next week. Just how Andy Reid likes to scheme it up. So not playing Sky Moore just because of the rookie learning curve, and obviously he's still not going to play Pacheco because of his role behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't think he gets as much work in a game. It's going to be a lot more competitive. I was going to say the Chiefs will win, but 4 points is way too many points to give to the Chargers, whose offense is that dynamic. I expect it to be a really close game. The Chiefs will win by 2 or 3 points, but giving me more than a field goal, come on, I'm taking the Chargers on that line. So those are all the games that we run through. Now we're going to move on to my guys for the week, and it kind of sucks. Like, I had a really good grade on some of my guys last week, but now I can't pick them anymore. No one's has any lack of confidence playing Kareem Hunt. He's now a bona fide RB2. No one has any lack of confidence playing Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's a bona fide RB2 now. So the better I do, the harder it's going to get down the line, but I'm ready for that challenge. So I've dug deep, pulled out some guys that I'm ready to go out on a limb on and hold myself accountable to for this week. And the first one is going to be a guy who returns. It's going to be Nyheim Hines, run it back. Same game script as last week, playing a very weak defense to the Jags, and he proved himself to be the second best receiving option on that team. Alex Pierce is dealing with concussion. The tight ends were not heavily involved, and he did end up with 6 receptions on 8 targets for 50 yards. So I will look to hopefully they learn their lessons from the Texans. They're going to put this game away early. Frank Reich's going to do what he said he'd do and rest Pittman and Taylor. And Nyheim Hines will be heavily involved in garbage time and down the stretch of that game and pull out a really, really solid game for someone in need of a spot flex start. Moving on, bounce back game for Josh Jacobs. Obviously, this is a matchup that I've been looking forward to with the highlight, as we talked about earlier. He is a very good pass catching back, and we saw what Clyde Edwards-Helaire did to the Cardinals last week. And I'm kind of just imagining the kind of a revamping of Clyde Edwards-Helaire last week, this week in Josh Jacobs. This is a bounce back game for the Raiders. They need to get themselves on the board, and they're going to tear it up against that weakened Cardinals defense. Look for Josh Jacobs to be heavily involved both through the air and on the ground. Number 3, I'm actually going to pick up one of my waiver pickups and put even more confidence instilled in him in Curtis Samuel. Like I said, he's a mini Debo. His target share utilization in the office was absolutely insane. He was top 5 in target share, up with Justin Jefferson. Like, that's insane. Justin Jefferson, Curtis Samuel, these two are not the same players, but he had 22 total opportunities, 11 on the ground, 11 through the air. He's utilized in both the run and pass game very heavily. We've seen this production be pretty consistent with the same coach down in Carolina. Also against a pretty weakened Lions defense that is still in the early stages of rebuilding. Look for Samuel to continue to be heavily utilized in both aspects of the run and pass game and to have another monster game. Number 4, dipping back down into my waiver wire pickup bag, Robert Tonyan. There was tons of mistakes made by the rookies last week. That massive drop by Christian Watson obviously is the one that sticks out in their mind, but there's also a ton of little mental things that Rodgers had hinted about after the game with Romeo Doubs not running the proper routes or not hitching at the right spot. So look for Rodgers, and even in practice this past week, people have said that Watson's running great routes, and Rodgers is just not looking his way. Romeo Doubs is getting open down the field, and Rodgers is just not looking his way. So we know what Rodgers is going to do. He's a weird guy. He's a stickler in his ways, but he's going to go back to his veterans. He's going to go back to the guys that he trusts. This is going to be against against the Bears, who fairly Rodgers has owned for the past over a decade. It's going to be at Lambeau, going to be a revenge game because Rodgers is absolutely mortified at what happened against the Vikings last week. And Tonyan had a couple end zone targets. I mean, even at the end of the game, the one that sticks out in my mind was that touchdown target that just barely crept out of Tunyon's hands. So if that comes in, we're talking about a completely different tight end. He jumps into the top 5 tight ends, completely different outlook on Robert Tonyan. I've seen him still not picked up in waivers from 2 days ago or so. So if you really need a spot start at tight end, if George Kittle is still giving you fits and not playing, Robert Tonyan's a guy that I have confidence in playing this week. And finally, going real deep here, I haven't even mentioned this team on this show in a while. Chase Claypool from the Steelers. New England's defense did not look great against the Miami Dolphins, and that's with Tua playing really, really poorly. PFF graded him, I think, 50.6, which is bad. That is a bad grade, and they still put up tons of points and blew out the New England defense and the New England team as a whole. I expect the Steelers to win this game, but the hallmark of Bill Belichick is he takes away your number one option. That's obviously Diontae Johnson. He's the wide receiver number 1, and currently why I have more faith in Chase Claypool is the foot injury to Najee. We don't know what's going on. This has been something that's been lingering since preseason, and who's a wide receiver the Steelers used out of the backfield before and had success rushing touchdowns? Oh, yeah. It's Chase Claypool. I expect him to be utilized in both the pass game and the run game and to actually make a pretty significant impact this week against New England Patriots. So those are my 5 guys. Again, we'll circle back around next Tuesday, grade them. Hopefully I have a pretty good grade similar to what I had for week 1. That was a great mark, and I hope to continue living up to it. So here we go. Parting thoughts.
You know, there's only one thing that I'm not clear about.
Actually, there is one thing.
One other thing.
This was critical, and I think this needs to be talked about when we have 2 Monday night games this week and 3 really high fantasy relevant teams in the Bills, Vikings, and Eagles. And I really just don't like, from the strategy of fantasy football, I do not like saving players until Monday night unless they are like an absolutely no questions asked guy they need to play. From one standpoint, you don't know if something's going to happen injury-wise, and if you leave a guy... And if a guy gets injured, you have very, very limited options to replace him with when it comes down to game time. So a guy that, let's say if A.J. Brown was dealing with a hamstring and I had Adam Thielen, I know they're playing each other, but let's say Adam Thielen or Terry McLaurin is playing on Sunday at noon and A.J. Brown might play on Monday. I'm definitely going with the player that I know for sure will play, so I don't want to be stuck there on Monday night holding the bag full of an empty spot of A.J. Brown to pick up 0 points, and I have to, transition to a potential Boston Scott now on my flex spot, or even worse, throwing in a KJ Osborne as if I need a wide receiver spot to fill. That's just not really good. Also, with strategy, I like to kind of play around. My team is always really flexible based on how the game goes. I always like to, have a good core of players in the 12 o'clock spot, and then I try to leave my flexes open, and I try to work around in the later games. So if I'm losing, then my flexes then become guys who have high upside shots, like I talked about. Maybe I'm throwing in an MVS or a Mecole Hardman, someone who can go off and break off 2 really deep touchdowns in the Kansas City office and potentially bring me back. If I'm winning handily, maybe I'm going to throw a guy in there that's going to be, a little bit more secure, guarantee maybe a little bit more points, because I don't need those game-winning weeks. But also if I get a goose, then I'm really kind of screwing the pooch. So that's when I would alternate to a Diontae Johnson, someone who's going to get me that bona fide 11 points. So, but if you leave those players that you're taking your depth shots on until Monday night, if something happens and you're really down bad or you're behind, you can't alter your strategy if those players are locked into your lineup. And finally, the less players I have to worry about on Monday night and the more that my players play on Sunday, I can function better at work knowing kind of the general trajectory of my team. So hopefully I kind of explained that in a clear fashion about how I like to play and how I strategize some of my teams in order to evaluate where I am halfway through the day on Sunday, and if I need to make an adjustment to higher upside players or maybe some safer players, and how leaving a ton of guys in on Monday night limits that upside that you can potentially get for your team. So, all right, guys, so that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Again, I won't be posting any more YouTube content for the rest of the week. This is kind of my final word on week 2. I will be active on Twitter, so go follow me there at TwinTakesFF. We'll be doing some more up-to-date news throwing out some more player takes right up until Sunday of game day. And also, if you've enjoyed this content and it's really been helping you in your fantasy league, maybe I've given you some of those my guys that have worked out for you, go ahead, like the video, subscribe, share with your other friends, and help grow this channel. It's been really fun to do all this stuff. Take care.